Welcome back to the business of space. I'm Ali Velshi. SpaceX's inaugural flight test of the Falcon 9 rocket in 2010 showed the world that newcomers are the future of the commercial space industry. Since then, everyone from tech billionaires to venture capitalists have been pumping millions of dollars into space startups. No surprise, many of these startups are located in the heart of Silicon Valley. The stakes are high and there are no guarantees of big payoffs, but as Melissa Chan reports, that isn't stopping these startups from thinking big.
It's a prospector's map to hidden treasure. Only the map is of space, and the treasure lies in asteroids. Private space company Planetary Resources believes that incredible amounts of plutonium and rare earth metals could be mined from these asteroids, metals used in electronics that to date are mined mostly in China.
The ability to access resources in that environment, as opposed to digging up the Earth and hauling things up out of the gravity well of Earth, that is a change in the economic equation of the cost of doing business in space.
The prospector for their galactic enterprise, an orbiting space telescope called the Archid. In the coming decades, the plan is to send robotic probes to collect and bring samples back to Earth, but it may be decades before real payback happens for investors in asteroid mining. And there are setbacks, like this one. One of Planetary Resources' Archid telescopes headed for testing in space was destroyed in the Antares rocket explosion.
Stage 1 separation.
Many other commercial space companies lost equipment being sent to the space station for testing.
Putting things into orbit is not a trivial task.
It was the same for Will Marshall's space company, Planet Labs. It lost 26 nanosatellites in the explosion.
Your company took a hit?
Yes, but not on the scale that you might imagine. I mean, really, we took this in our stride. It's not a huge deal for us financially.
Planet Labs had already launched 71 of their nanosatellites into space in the last 18 months, with an estimated resolution of 10 to 16 feet.
This is one of Planet Labs' nanosatellites. It's just 12 inches long and 4 inches wide. Not exactly what you think of when you think of satellites. They call these doves and send them up in flocks, 20 or 30 at a time, into orbit. And the aim is to take pictures of the entire planet, not just one site.
It covers about 100 square kilometers per picture.
Nanosatellites are smaller and much less expensive to manufacture than its predecessors.
CubeSats today have more capability than the biggest satellites that we flew 50 or 40 years ago.
And they're disposable. After a year or two, they burn into the atmosphere, and more are launched. It's changing the way we see the Earth.
These are sugarcane fields in south and east of the Amazon. This was August 8th. This was August 9th, and you can see where both this field is being burned and sort of points up why it's important to see the Earth every day.
Companies, or even countries, will be able to buy the information beamed back by the satellites in real time about a part of the globe of interest.
They give us the option of really accessing space for sometimes less than $100,000 or even cheaper. And with that kind of low-cost technology, we have the ability to image the Earth at greater frequencies than we've ever done before.
Planet Labs raised $65 million in 2013 to launch its satellites.
Are you looking at a multi-billion-dollar industry when it comes to nanosatellites?
No, I think we estimated it at several gazillion. I'm just being silly. Yeah, so no, it is a very large sector. The remote sensing sector is pretty large and expanding.
Nanosatellites and CubeSats are one of the fastest growing sectors of the space industry, and potentially one of the most lucrative. The number of these Earth observation satellites is expected to increase by almost 90% over the next decade, resulting in more than $35 billion in manufacturing revenues.
The ability to actually get satellites into orbit fast is really important.
And Jason Dunn wants to help those satellites get into orbit quicker. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Made in Space, a startup that has built a zero-gravity 3D printer.
We have liftoff of the Falcon 9.
The company launched its first 3D printer to the International Space Station for testing in September. But Dunn thinks his 3D printer could be a game changer for nanosatellites by 3D printing the satellite.
We're actually finding ways that we can launch some of the parts, the electronics, for instance, that you can't 3D print, and then printing the rest of the satellite, assembling it on the space station, and launching it. And that's something that we're able to do right now.
The satellites could then be made and released in space, dramatically reducing the cost of launch.
What this actually ends up doing for the satellite industry is it makes it easier to constantly get new satellites on orbit.
Dunn believes Made in Space's 3D printer will be crucial in the short term by helping astronauts living on the space station to 3D print spare parts. But in the long term, Dunn sees a much bigger, more ambitious picture.
It really points to a vision where we can remove dependency on Earth, where we can go to the moon and use the resources there and put that into a 3D printer and turn it into a house on the moon. It points to a direction of where human space exploration is headed.
Planet Labs has launched more commercial satellites this year than anyone else. Some were very short-lived and deorbited quickly, but it's just the beginning. The company plans to launch another 100 nanosatellites in the next year. Ali?
Thanks, Melissa. Melissa Chan for us on that story. I want to introduce my next guest. You can equate the space startup industry today with the internet startup industry of the 90s. That's according to Chad Anderson. He's the managing director of the Space Angels Network, which represents a group of investors that seed fledgling space startups. And you were watching this with me, Chad. I mean, I am so fascinated that there are people who think about these things. Yeah. How does a guy like you, responsible for helping companies like X-Core and Planetary Resources, which we showed in the story, how do you know what's fantastical and ridiculous versus what really has potential?
I think people are starting to remember that the economy is not a closed system. So it's creation and R&D and science and innovation that fuels. It creates the new ventures and the new markets that stimulate the growth of the entire system. So as an investor, what you really want to look for is things that are pushing boundaries, that might seem fantastical to some, that are, developing technology that's an order of magnitude better than anything else that exists, or is creating an entirely new market. I mean, that's how you make outsized returns, and that's what Silicon Valley was founded on, that mentality in the beginning. It's only recently that investors have started to reduce early stage investing to a formula, a diversification formula.
Yeah. Right, and so this is, I guess this gets to my next question. I mean, there's no real return on this, right? Other than having sold your investment to someone else, nothing that we have developed to go into space in this current commercial space boom has returned a profit.
In terms of returns to the investor, we're just starting to see some exits. I mean, this is still a very early...
And I should be clear, there are companies that support the industry, that build parts, that manufacture things. Right. That's where the money is at the moment. Nobody's going out to space and doing something and somehow selling that at a profit.
Some ones that you wouldn't really think of, Planetary Resources is making money. X-Core is making money. Astrobotic is another moon, Google Lunar X Prize competitor who's looking to mine the moon, and they're making money today. So,
but where are they making the money? They're not that they set out to make money on. In other words, nobody's going to the moon bringing resources back. And
they haven't gone yet, but they're taking customer orders.
Is the failure rate in space going to be higher than that in Silicon Valley, or is it about the same?
This is a very interesting question because we're still early days. So to put it into context, though, Leroy was talking about this, but 15 years ago, 95, 98, there was a false start in the industry. Charlatans, he called them, but there was the success rate back then was minimal. The failure rate was almost all. Nowadays, the difference is, he also mentioned, is that entrepreneurs are coming, they're a lot more savvy. They're coming to the table with business plans that make sense. They're not saying, give me $1 billion and I'll build you a rocket ship, which is what they were saying before. They know how to do a lot more with less. And what's happening today, to give you an idea, we've had 100 companies have applied to our network this year. Probably 20 of those have made it through our screening process and been presented to investors as credible businesses.
Pretty good percentage.
Yeah, it's higher than we've been in the past, actually. So it speaks to the quality increases that we're seeing. And then that's resulted in 5 investments so far this year. And we're in due diligence talks with a couple more as well. So we could have another deal or two before the year is over.
What an interesting discussion. Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Chad Anderson is the managing director of the Space Angels Network. Well, when it comes to space startups and the commercial industry, the United States is well ahead the rest of the world. But coming up, we'll tell you the one thing China is doing way better than America when the business of space continues.
Telecommunications, satellite TV, GPS, technologies that are all enabled by space and used by billions of us around the world. While governments have been the primary backers of space projects over the last decade, it's now private organisations playing an important role. So is there gold to be had out there in that universe? Is there anything we won't pastiche on this programme? I'm surprised they haven't given me a lightsaber to hold while I do my next interview, because we're going to go live to Necker Island in the Caribbean, where I'm joined by Sir Richard Branson. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much. And you, of course, have been at the forefront of saying space can be commercialised.
Space will be commercialised, and I think it should be commercialised because governments have not been interested in you or me or the average person in the street who would love to go to space being able to go to space. Governments are not particularly interested in building aircraft that can cross continents at a fraction of the speed that they currently cross continents, and governments are not that interested in satellite technology and trying to make sure that the price of telephones and internet access and Wi-Fi access comes down dramatically and is reached by millions of people who currently don't have it. So it certainly should be commercialized, and that's exactly what the likes of Virgin Galactic and Elon Musk are doing.
And you know, you look at your business career and you have been a genius at sort of tapping into what the public mood is and what it wants. I just want to know what level of interest you have had for, you know, your Virgin Galactica project.
Massive interest. I mean, you know, we've already got 700 people who've signed up to go into space, and that's at quite a high price. I mean, massively less than it would cost them to go up on a Russian spaceship, which would be about $50 million. We brought it down to $250,000, and we will bring it down more as in the years to come. So, you know, most people, you know, would love it if they could afford it, to be able to go to space, and the initial pioneers who are flying on Virgin will enable us to get the price down in the years to come, so that many people watching this program will have a chance to go to space one day.
I look at the way you've marketed your airlines, and it's fun, and there's a great atmosphere on board, and you've got these great clubhouses at the airports, all the rest of it. But isn't actually flying into space going to be a massively uncomfortable experience? You may get a great view out the window, but by and large, it's not going to be a kind of, you know, oh, look, we can stand at the bar and have a glass of champagne.
It's not going to be for the weakest of us, but there is still going to be, I would say, 9 out of 10 people on Earth who would be capable of going to space if they wanted to. They'll have the ride of a lifetime. They will be able to look out of the windows and marvel at this beautiful Earth. They will be able to, you know, to float around in the sky, which will be a remarkable thing to be able to do. They'll be able to experience things they'll never have a chance to experience in their lifetime back here on Earth. And they will be the pioneers which will enable the likes of Virgin Galactic to invest in point-to-point air travel. I mean, you know, we're building spaceships with wings. Nobody else is doing that. The reason we're building spaceships with wings is we want them to get bigger and bigger, and we want one day to be able to go from London to Australia in an hour or a little bit over an hour by putting people into orbit and then you know, traveling at 18,000 miles an hour and then popping back out again once we've reached Australia. And you know, it sounds like space fantasy. It sort of is, but we're going to try to make it become a reality.
Yeah, I said you were on Necker Island. You haven't had too much sun. I mean, this is reality, isn't it?
Look, I like to dream big, and we've got 350 magnificent engineers and technicians who will try to make those dreams become reality. Now, we may fall flat on our face, but I don't think we will. I mean, our space program is definitely going to happen this year. I'm definitely going to go up this year. I'm sorry, this year. I mean, we're already at the end of the year, early next year. And that will be the start of a whole new space era. And I think there were quite a lot of people who doubted we'd ever get to that. We are on the verge of doing that. And then I think a lot of these other things are going to be possible. I mean, arrays of satellites, which will transform what goes on back here on Earth. And then, point-to-point travel, hotels in space. We're keeping dreaming, and we'll try to make those dreams a reality.
Richard Branson, very, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So, a fascinating glimpse there of what Virgin Galactic are trying to do. Well, let's discuss this a little more. In our lead studio, Stuart Martin from Satellite Applications Catapult, a company that's looking to energise the new space sector in the UK. And with me here in the studio, Chad Anderson from Space Angels Network. And they filter out the best space business plans and put them in front of investors. Chad, let me come to you first of all. What we heard from Richard Branson, I mean, with it as ever, there was a kind of, there's a core reality that some of these things are going to happen. And then there's aspiration.
Yep.
How much of a gap is there between reality and aspiration now?
Well, it's important to dream big, I think. And when you're talking about space, I think everyone is dreaming big. The important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about hardware companies here, and a lot of investors to date have gotten comfortable with investing in software companies. These are hardware companies, and when you're talking about doing things in space, you're talking about a little bit longer timeline than most investors have been used to typically. We might be talking about 10 years, we might be talking about 20 years, but the important thing to keep in mind is, as an entrepreneur, is to figure out ways to make money now, figure out how to make money along the way, how to reach milestones, and create some revenue for yourself to keep yourself going.
Because on one level, the launch of this satellite yesterday is, so what? It's another satellite going up. But this is a private sector taking charge of the operation. It wasn't,
right.
It wasn't dependent on NASA or the Russians to go there.
It was a private sector rocket taking a private sector satellite. So I think that might be the first time that that's ever happened.
We're seeing that kind of blast off now on our screens. And just how much, I mean, presumably you needed vast amounts of capital to be raised to do something like that.
Right. Well, the idea is,
I just wonder how long, what is the timescale for the investors to get a return on their capital?
Well, you can do it in a reasonable time frame, I think. I think 5 to 10 years is reasonable. I think that you see a couple of companies that are getting a lot of attention right now, and you're talking about Virgin Galactic and SpaceX, and these have big backers behind them, but there's other companies that have been making, that have gotten investment capital and are building rocket planes as well. You've got X-Core Aerospace, you've got NanoRacks, for example. These are both companies that have found ways to turn their long vision idea into reality by making money along the way.
Okay, well, let's go to our lead studio and speak to Stuart Martin now. Stuart, I just wonder kind of what you're looking to do and whether you're finding it difficult to raise money for the sort of projects you want to engage in.
Okay, thank you. Well, perhaps if I could just comment on the launch of the SpaceX rocket yesterday. I think the interesting thing about that is that is a company that came out of a realization within NASA that they found themselves operating a launch system and a people transfer system that was really had its heritage in 30-year-old technology, and that wasn't really what the NASA, the space agency, was set up to do. They were supposed to advance science and advance new technologies. So they recognized at that point that this was the time to hand over responsibility for the routine operations to the commercial companies. And they came up with the Space Act, and that has prompted a whole new set of companies to come into this arena and operate space on a new basis. And we're seeing that transition happen all over the world, where the state agencies are stepping back from space technology and letting the commercial companies come through and take advantage of the developments that have happened over the last 50 years and really allow that technology to develop to its full potential.
I realise this next question may make me sound like a psychiatrist rather than a journalist, but what is your dream?
My dream? Well, here in the UK, we've set out a dream of creating a £40 billion sector within 20 years on the commercialization of space. We've seen this trend happening over the last 10 years where the fastest growing part of the space sector is the commercial sector. So if you look at, right now we have a $200 billion global sector in space, 3/4 of which is run by the state programs, but that is diminishing really quickly and the commercial sector is growing really fast. And so the vision is that in 20 years' time, the 45% of that, what will then be a £400 billion sector, $600 billion sector, will be commercial, and the UK will have a significant slice of that market.
Okay, and Chad, let me come to you finally and say that, what obviously is going to grab headlines next year is if Virgin Galactic takes off and people go into space kind of and they're fee-paying customers and it's commercial. What are the other applications that we should be looking at that may not grab the headlines, but actually from an investment point of view and for the, developing, monetizing space will be equally significant, if not more so?
Well, what they're also doing, besides just tourists, is scientific payloads as well, which shouldn't be overlooked, because I think that that's going to be a big part of their revenue stream, and into the future it might be the majority of the revenue stream. But the interesting thing, I think, in space is, just like any other industry, is the services. So it's what makes it tick. It's the suits that people wear. It's garbage collection, to use an analogy here on Earth. It's milk delivery in the 50s. It's, these types of things. So it's the things that produce parts and provide services for the space sector as a whole.
I tell you what, I think Richard Branson is still listening. Do you fancy any of those yourself, Richard?
Well, we'd love to maybe, help clear up some of the old rubbish that's in space one day. We'd love to, maybe mine asteroids. We put a little bit of money into research into that. Maybe one day mining helium-3 off the moon. Who's to know? I mean, there's lots and lots of incredible things out there to be done. And once you've got going, then moving from one step on to the next, will happen, and we'll see how many years it takes.
Fantastic. Richard Branson, thank you so much for being with us. Stuart Martin in Leeds and Chad Anderson in the studio. It was really great to have you all on that subject. Stay with us.
Based in the tech city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Is it a tech city? I don't know. I live in Africa, okay? Everything not here is a tech city to me. So in the tech capital of Pittsburgh, there exists a robotics company called Astrobotic. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Starlight, where we shine some light on the lesser-known space companies doing the work to make our most science-fictional dreams become reality. If you missed any of the previous episodes, there will be a link to the playlist in the description down below, and I'll put a link up top to the most recent one. It is, of course, the Asteroid Mining Planetary Resources. While this is a small channel, the idea of these videos is to make people realize that it's not all SpaceX out there, even though they are doing some incredible work. In that spirit, you'll find links to all of the company's social media and websites in the description, so please head out there and show them some love. With that said, we're now go for launch, so let's dive in. Founded in 2007 by Carnegie Mellon Professor of Robotics Dr. William Red Whitaker, Astrobotic's mission statement is to, quote, make space accessible to the world. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it's because it is. Most private spaceflight companies, including even SpaceX, has a motto of this kind, and it's a good thing, because the biggest blockage to space right now is without question cost of access. Although, to be fair, with their current focus on lunar landers, it may be more accurate to say that they want to make the moon accessible to the world, because they're essentially a lunar launch system if you think about it. They're going there, and you are paying to go along for the ride. So Astrobotic is a space robotics company with a current focus on building lunar landers to take things to the moon. The idea is that by stacking a bunch of payloads together, you can avoid the excessive cost of multiple launches and having to engineer a lunar lander for every unique mission, like the Chinese Space Agency recently did with their lunar rover. They had to engineer the Chang'e 4 rover just for that mission, and that obviously runs the costs up a lot. They have a really experienced team. If you do a Control F search on their team page, you'll see at least 10 results for NASA. This doesn't necessarily mean all of them have worked there, but some definitely have, and it's always so reassuring to me when a company's roster includes ex-NASA and Lockheed Martin employees, or just individuals who worked on DARPA projects, because it's sometimes hard to differentiate between startups who are actually sending hardware to space and startups who are just trying to run away with investment money. Luckily in this case, Astrobotic's hardware is all but ensured to hit the surface of the moon. Now, I don't want to get into their history too much. This channel is, after all, about the future that lies ahead and not the boring past we've already conquered. What a snooze fest. So I'll give you the short version of the most recent and relevant details. They've been developing lunar lander concepts for over 12 years, starting with their Griffin lander. In 2016, they announced a revamp of that lander called the Peregrine. And in 2018, they participated in a bid for NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS. In May of this year, Astrobotic was selected by the CLPS to deliver 14 payloads to the moon, with a Peregrine in July 2021. To complete this task, they awarded $79.5 million. So onto their projects. The main one right now is the Peregrine lander, which will be launched on the upcoming United Launch Alliance Vulcan Centaur rocket. The idea is to have a multi-use lander that will essentially be acting as a delivery service to the lunar orbit and its surface. So if you have a satellite you want to image the moon with, Peregrine can take it to the lunar orbit. If you have a digging drone you want to prospect the moon with, Peregrine can take it to the surface of the moon. It has a modular payload system with multiple hardware mounting points to accommodate different payload needs, and will run you a cool $1.2 million per kilogram, taking 90 kilograms total to the moon on its first mission. A really cool element of the Peregrine is its use of Doppler LiDAR that they developed themselves to automatically determine landing zones and to then land there. And yes, provided you could cover the entrance fee, of course, you yourself can ship something to the moon as soon as 2021. Having partnered with DHL, you can now pay for your very own DHL Moonbox to deliver any small memento to the surface of the moon. Much like shipping anything internationally, you select the dimensions of your package that in this case they've renamed to the sci-fi friendly Moon Capsule. The capsule then is integrated into a moon pod that will be home to dozens of these little capsules. This is then sent as part of the lunar surface payload aboard the Peregrine lander. They'll even send you a little photo confirming it's part of the payload, along with a map of the landing site and a mission certificate. Now, since these capsules only go up to about an inch in size, you won't be paying $1.2 million to send it. Prices range from as high as $25,800 to an honestly kind of surprisingly low $460. Now, since the object has to be inert, you won't be able to package any electronics in there, but it's cute if you want to send a family heirloom. Some of the suggestions on their website are rings or cufflinks or, something like that. Yes, it's pointless, but it's also kind of cool to think that you can send something to the moon. You can send something to the moon, okay? That's pretty awesome. And for the price of I don't know, okay? Again, I live in Africa. What does $500 get you in first world countries? Customers who have signed up to use the Peregrine range from universities to space agencies and include NASA, Canadensis Aerospace, and Atlas Space Operations. They plan on sending multiple Peregrine landers over the coming years, with the first one, as mentioned, scheduled as early as 2021. With these launches, the Peregrine will be taking data gathering instruments, satellites, and so far up to 3 lunar rovers to the moon. Using their online mission planner, you can customize your very own payload aboard the Peregrine. But the Peregrine is not the only thing they've got going for them. They have an entire department they call Future Missions and Technology, or FMUT for short. Do yourself a favor and go read up on the details of all of their projects on their website. It's pretty cool. But suffice it to say, the projects range from modular automated landing systems to virtual simulations identifying potential landing sites, and they even built an excavating rover that can traverse rough terrain with the goal of preparing alien terrains for human colonization. And that's pretty much it for Astrobotic, guys. Do check out their website, there's a ton of cool things on there, and if their careers page is anything to go by, they are growing fast, so show them some love, and maybe, hey, if you've got a background in engineering, send them your resume. For more space news and deep dives on unknown space companies, please get subscribed. And if you like this video, hit the like button. If you dislike the video, hit the dislike button and tell me why in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching White Fox, and I'll see you next time.
Carnegie Mellon University and Astrobotic, a space robotics company, have been awarded a $5.6 million contract by NASA to build a small, speedy lunar rover called Moon Ranger. According to Astrobotic, the autonomous rover will weigh only 13 kilograms and could land on the moon by 2021 or 2022. According to press releases by NASA and Carnegie Mellon, Moon Ranger will be the size of a suitcase. It will be taken to the moon via Astrobotic's lunar lander Peregrine. There, the robot will operate autonomously on week-long missions within 1 kilometer of its lander. It could search the moon's polar regions for ice or lunar pits and produce detailed 3D maps of the moon's terrain. Data gathered by Moon Ranger will be relayed back to our planet via radio once the rover returns to its lander. This is because the rover is too small and is unable to carry a radio powerful enough to communicate with Earth.
Welcome to Our Region's Business with your host, Bill Flanagan.
Today on Our Region's Business, move over Apollo 11. A Pittsburgh startup prepares for its own moonshot, plus 2 sports partnerships in our region that are worlds apart. The Pittsburgh Knights join forces with Replay FX to add esports to the biggest arcade event in America, coming up right here in our region. And the Pittsburgh Riverhounds and Allegheny Health Network break ground on a new health and sports complex. But first, 50 years after Apollo 11 went where no man or woman had ever gone before, a Pittsburgh company called Astrobotic prepares to return to the moon with a robot from Carnegie Mellon along for the ride. I caught up with the CEO recently in downtown Pittsburgh. Well, John Thornton of Astrobotic, I guess congratulations. It's finally getting real.
Oh, thank you. We are so thrilled to be on contract with NASA to take their payloads to the surface of the moon.
Well, and what does that mean exactly? What is Astrobotic going to be doing for NASA?
So we have 14 payloads from NASA that are going to be attached to our lander, and we're going to take them up to the surface of the moon, and they're paying us $79 million to get that done.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty good contract.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty darn exciting. So we are now fully funded, and countdown is started for the launch.
Okay, and we're talking a couple of years at this point?
That's right. That's right. So June, July of 2021 is our target launch date.
Well, and this is really becoming a Pittsburgh thing in a lot of ways. It's not just Astrobotic, but it's kind of connected to your roots as well at Carnegie Mellon.
That's right. That's right. Carnegie Mellon just won a $2 million contract to study the caves at the moon.
Okay.
And the caves are incredibly interesting because if you can get inside of it, it's natural protection from the elements. And the elements on the moon are the radiation that comes from the sun. You get the meteorites that come down. There's no atmosphere to burn them up. And then it's super hot during the day and super cold at night. So it's above boiling during the day and liquid nitrogen at night.
So you need a special machine to be able to deal with those kinds of conditions.
That's right. Or you could find one of these caves, and that's what Carnegie Mellon is taking a look at.
Okay. And then there's another Carnegie Mellon connection as well, which has to do with the arts.
That's right. Yeah, Carnegie Mellon is sending the first art to the surface of the moon and bringing a whole package around that. And it's like remarkable, the detail and what they put into that.
Well, and we actually we featured them on the television show probably a couple of years ago now. It's like an entire museum in a little box. Right?
That's right. That's right. And it's I think it's a great mark for Pittsburgh and mark for the country to have something like that attached to the mission. And I think it's going to be something that when we go back to visit the landing site sometime in the future, that's going to be an important piece to take a look at.
So Carnegie Mellon's going to build a rover to go there, and the Moon Ark's going to go along for the ride, but somehow they've got to get there, and that's where Astrobotic fits in.
That's right. That's what we do. So we're like a delivery service to take payloads up to the surface of the moon. So think like a railroad to the moon. It all starts with transportation. So we build the lander here in Pittsburgh. We buy a launch to get to space. We put our lander on top of that launch vehicle, and then from there, we go out to the surface of the moon.
So you buy a launch. So you use a commercial service, a rocket to get to the moon?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so we're going to launch out of Florida, likely, and we're actually hitching a ride on a launch. So we're sharing a ride with somebody else, and we're what's called the secondary. So we're going to be deployed second once we get up to space. And then our lander takes over and goes the rest of the way out. So it's what's called a single-stage spacecraft. So there's no separations or anything else. We go out to the moon, we drop into lunar orbit, and we can actually leave some payloads in lunar orbit, and then we descend down to the surface. And then once we're on the surface, we become the local utility. So we provide power and communications for the payloads that come with us. So it's a one-stop, all-service included service for our customers.
It's quite a vision. You've been at it for how long now at Astrobotic?
It's been 12 years, so it's been a long time in the making.
Well, and you think about that, bringing an idea like this to market, you must have really patient investors.
Yeah, actually, we have some investors, but we're actually mostly driven by revenues. So we've had 29, or actually 30 contracts now from NASA to date, and that's been one of our sources of revenue. And then we've also taken down payments from customers that are interested in flying.
Okay.
So we've largely grown the company on revenue, which is something we are really, really proud of.
But revenue for doing what? Because you've been developing this technology along the way. So what are they getting value out of the contracts?
So the contracts for NASA, we have a series of R&D contracts that we do. So it's everything from exploring caves, we actually have a contract around that, to precision landing on the surface of the moon. We won a $10 million contract from NASA for that last year, and a whole array of different SBIRS, TTR kinds of contracts over the years. So that's fueled the company, kept us going, and created enough resource for us to create the market and ultimately sell into the market for lunar payload delivery to the moon.
How many of you are there at Astrobotic now?
We're now up to 21, and that's an all-time high for us, and because of this big win with NASA, we're going to be going up to about 60 to maybe even 70 people.
Wow, that's incredible. Pittsburgh, our region, a good place to be doing what you're doing. We seem a little unlikely in some ways.
Yeah, Pittsburgh doesn't have a strong space activity going on here, but there are some
pockets. It's been about 50 years, I think, since
it's been a while.
That was happening.
But we're here because of the robotics in town. So ultimately, space robotics is our core, and we import space from out of town, and we home grow robotics, and that makes the world's best space robotics.
Okay, so a lot of logic being here. So what's the timing from this point forward? I mean, how real is this really? Do you have an actual launch date yet?
So countdown clock has started now.
Okay.
So we are looking at a June, July of 2021 launch date and landing date.
Okay.
So it's coming up. It's about 2 years out. So we are scrambling to finish the design, and then we're going to be ordering all of our long lead items and then building it in a clean room here in Pittsburgh.
Pretty cool to have this sort of come to life and become real around the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11.
It is perfect timing, and I think what's momentous about this is that this is the first time America will go back since the Apollo era, and it's also going to be marking the first time the commercial industry is going to be landing on the surface of the moon. And we're bringing with us 7 other nations other than the U.S. with us. So in some sense, it's kind of like their Apollo moment for their nation. And I think that's a really exciting thing for Pittsburgh and an exciting thing for the nation to be leading the rest of the world back to the moon.
So you mentioned the commercial aspect of this. What makes this a business opportunity? You know, historically, it was about beating the Soviets to the moon, and it was about science, I guess. Why is there a business in what you're doing?
So there's a whole array of payloads all over the world that want to fly to the moon for various reasons. So some is science exploration, some is resource development at the poles. So you can turn water into rocket fuel. That could be one of the first commodities in space, and rocket fuel in space is really, really valuable. Another one is infrastructure. So we've got folks building communication networks on the surface of the moon, for example, and some are just marketing, just for fun kind of thing. So it's a whole array of different objectives from the different customers, but it's kind of like what's in the back of a delivery truck. All different ideas going on in there, but we're basically the delivery truck that makes the whole thing possible to go to the moon.
You're going to be scaling up, so I assume it means you're going to need a few good men and women to help you do this.
Indeed. We have a ton of openings right now for engineers of all different types. Space experience is nice, but not necessary for every position, and we're, again, adding about 40 positions to the company, so we're actively looking for great talent.
Oh, exciting time. The company's called Astrobotic. John Thornton, thank you so much. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, next up, from outer space to the world of sports, the Pittsburgh Riverhounds and the Allegheny Health Network expand their partnership promoting soccer and sports medicine. Please stay with us.